The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Guard Captain Marcus Williams adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what would be his final time. 23 years of dedicated service had earned him respect among his peers and recognition from the royal family themselves. His polished boots clicked rhythmically against the marble floors as he made his way to the main gate, where his shift would begin like countless others before it. Marcus had always taken pride in his position. Being a royal guard wasn't just a job for him. It was a calling that had shaped his entire adult life. His wife Sarah often joked that he loved the palace more than their own home, and perhaps there was some truth to that. The sense of duty, the honor of protecting something greater than himself, and the tradition that stretched back centuries all combined to make his role feel sacred. The palace was busier than usual that Tuesday morning. State visit was scheduled for the following week, and preparations were already underway. Security protocols were being reviewed, guest lists finalized, and every detail scrutinized to ensure the event would proceed without incident. Marcus had been assigned to oversee the perimeter security, a responsibility that required him to coordinate with multiple teams and maintain his constant vigilance. As he reached his post at the eastern gate, Marcus exchanged pleasantries with the night shift guards who were preparing to leave. Officer Thompson, a younger man who had joined the force just 2 years prior, lingered for a moment to discuss some concerns about the upcoming visit. The conversation was routine, professional, but it revealed Marcus's natural leadership qualities. In his genuine care for his fellow officers, the first few hours of his shift passed without incident. Tourists gathered outside the gates, taking photographs and hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty. Children pressed their faces against the iron bars while their parents explained the significance of the guards' colorful uniforms and stoic expressions. Marcus had grown accustomed to being a living piece of history, a symbol that represented stability and tradition in an ever-changing world. Around mid-morning, Marcus noticed a commotion near the main road that ran parallel to the palace grounds. Traffic seemed heavier than usual, and several drivers appeared agitated. He made a mental note to keep an eye on the situation, as increased traffic sometimes led to security concerns. His training had taught him that seemingly minor details could sometimes indicate larger problems brewing. The radio crackled with routine communications between various security teams. Weather reports, visitor updates, and shift changes were all coordinated through the central command center. Marcus responded to each call with his characteristic professionalism, his voice calm and authoritative. His colleagues had learned to rely on his steady presence during both quiet periods and moments of crisis. As noon approached, Marcus decided to conduct a walking patrol along the perimeter fence. This wasn't required by protocol, but he believed in being proactive rather than reactive. The extra effort he put into his duties had not gone unnoticed by his superiors, and it was one of the reasons he had been selected for several high-profile assignments throughout his career. The palace gardens were in full bloom, creating a striking contrast against the formal architecture of the building. Marcus had witnessed the changing of seasons from this vantage point for over 2 decades, and he never tired of the natural beauty that surrounded his workplace. Sometimes he wondered what it would be like to experience the grounds as a visitor, rather than a protector, but that thought always passed quickly. A group of schoolchildren on a field trip had gathered near the gate, their teacher explaining the role of the royal guards. Marcus could hear fragments of the conversation, and it reminded him of his own childhood fascination with the palace. He had dreamed of wearing the uniform long before he understood what the responsibility truly entailed. With retirement approaching in just a few years, he reflected on how that childhood dream had shaped his entire life. The afternoon sun was climbing higher, and Marcus felt the familiar weight of his ceremonial sword at his side. The uniform, while impressive, was not always practical for extended periods of duty. The thick fabric and multiple layers were designed for appearance rather than comfort. But Marcus had long ago learned to adapt to any discomfort. It was a small sacrifice for the honor of serving. Radio chatter indicated that a minor diplomatic vehicle would be arriving within the hour for a routine meeting. Marcus coordinated with the interior security team to ensure proper protocols would be followed. These types of visits happened regularly, and the guards had developed efficient procedures to handle them smoothly while maintaining the appropriate level of security. As he stood at his post, Marcus thought about his family. Sarah had planned a special dinner for that evening to celebrate their wedding anniversary, which had been the previous weekend but postponed due to his work schedule. Their daughter Emma, now in her second year of university, would be joining them. These moments with family had become increasingly precious as he contemplated the eventual end of his career. The sound of approaching traffic drew his attention back to the present moment. A delivery truck was navigating the narrow street that bordered the palace grounds, and Marcus watched as the driver struggled with the tight quarters. The palace's location in the heart of the city meant that various types of vehicles regularly passed by, from tour buses to emergency services, and guards needed to remain alert to all potential situations. Marcus checked his watch and noted that his shift was progressing normally. In a few hours, the evening guards would arrive to take over, and he would head home to celebrate with his family. It was a routine he had followed thousands of times before, but something about this particular day felt different. Was the anticipation of the anniversary dinner, or maybe it was simply one of those moments when life feels particularly meaningful? Whatever the reason, Marcus felt grateful for the path his life had taken and the service he had been able to provide. The afternoon traffic on Regent Street had become increasingly chaotic as rush hour approached earlier than usual. James Mitchell, a 34-year-old construction worker, sat behind the wheel of his blue sedan, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with each passing minute. He had been stuck in the same spot for nearly 20 minutes, watching the traffic lights cycle through their colors while his lane remained motionless. James glanced at his phone for the fourth time in 10 minutes. The text message from his supervisor still glowed on the screen, demanding to know why he hadn't arrived at the job site yet. Another message from his wife Lisa asked about picking up groceries on the way home. The pressure of being late was mounting, and James could feel his stress levels rising with each honk from the frustrated drivers around him. The construction project he was supposed to oversee had already been delayed twice due to weather and permit issues. Today was supposed to be the day they finally got back on track, and his absence was causing problems for the entire crew. James had always prided himself on being reliable, the kind of person others could count on to show up and get things done. Being trapped in traffic felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for professionally. His phone rang, displaying his supervisor's number. James declined the call, knowing that explaining his situation over the phone while surrounded by honking cars would only make him appear more unreliable. He made a mental note to call back once he reached the job site, assuming he ever escaped this gridlock. The irony wasn't lost on him that someone whose job involved managing the flow of construction. Traffic was now completely helpless in regular traffic. A motorcycle weaved between the cars, its rider taking advantage of the narrow spaces that larger vehicles couldn't navigate. James watched enviously as the bike disappeared ahead, wishing he had chosen a different mode of transportation that morning. His car, usually a source of comfort and independence, now felt like a prison with an overheating engine and no escape route. The radio news report provided some explanation for the traffic situation. An earlier accident on the main highway had diverted traffic to the secondary roads, creating a domino effect that rippled through the entire transportation network. James switched between several radio stations, hoping to find better news, but each report painted the same picture of widespread delays and frustrated commuters behind him. A delivery van driver had begun honking his horn in a rhythmic pattern, apparently believing this would somehow speed up the dozens of vehicles ahead of them. The sound was becoming increasingly irritating. James found himself fighting the urge to get out of his car and confront the driver. Instead, he forced himself to take deep breaths and think about something more pleasant. Lisa had been planning a surprise for their 5-year wedding. Its anniversary next month. James wasn't supposed to know about it, but he had accidentally seen some of her research on their shared computer. The thought of disappointing her by being late for dinner added another layer of stress to his already overwhelming day. She'd been looking forward to spending more time together, especially after several months of his working overtime on various projects. The construction industry had been booming lately, which meant more work and better pay, but it also meant longer hours and increased pressure. James often found himself torn between the financial benefits of the busy season and his desire to maintain a healthy work-life balance. Today's traffic jam felt like the universe's way of forcing him to slow down, though not in the way he would have preferred. A pedestrian caught his attention as she walked along the sidewalk, moving faster than any of the vehicles on the road. She appeared to be heading in the same direction James needed to go, and for a moment he considered abandoning his car and walking the remaining distance. However, the construction tools in his trunk and the professional requirements of his job made that option impractical. His fuel gauge showed that he still had plenty of gas. But James began to worry about the environmental impact of sitting idle. With his engine running, he had recently become more conscious of such issues. Partly due to Lisa's influence and partly due to his own growing awareness of climate change, the contradiction between his concern for the environment and his current situation created another source of internal conflict. The driver in the car next to him, a woman in business attire, appeared to be conducting a conference call using her car's hands-free system. James could see her gesturing emphatically as she spoke, apparently managing some kind of crisis from behind the wheel. Her ability to remain productive during the delay impressed him and made him feel even more frustrated about his own helplessness. A police officer on foot patrol appeared near the intersection ahead, directing traffic manually after the traffic lights had apparently malfunctioned. James felt a surge of hope as he watched the officer's confident hand signals and decisive movements. Finally, someone with the authority and knowledge to address the situation was taking control. The radio announced another traffic update, this time mentioning specific street names that James recognized. According to the report, the situation was expected to improve within the next 30 minutes as crews worked to clear the original accident scene. This news provided some relief, though James knew that 30 minutes could easily stretch into an hour or more given how unpredictable traffic could be. He decided to call Lisa and explain his situation. Her understanding voice immediately calmed him down, and she even laughed about the groceries, saying she could handle the shopping herself. Her ability to remain positive and supportive during his moment of frustration reminded James why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. Sometimes the most important things in life were the people who stood by you during difficult moments. As the cars ahead began to move slightly, James felt a renewed sense of optimism. Perhaps the police officer's intervention was working, or maybe the highway situation had finally been resolved. Either way, the prospect of forward movement filled him with relief and anticipation. The police officer directing traffic at the intersection was doing his best to restore order to the chaos that had engulfed the normally well-organized streets around the Palace district. Officer David Chen had 20 years of experience managing traffic situations, but this particular afternoon was testing even his considerable skills. The combination of diverted highway traffic and malfunctioning traffic signals had created a perfect storm of congestion. From his position in the middle of the intersection, David could see the frustration building in the faces of drivers who had been trapped in their vehicles for far too long. Some were checking their phones constantly, others were engaged in heated phone conversations, and a few appeared to be on the verge of abandoning their cars altogether. The summer heat wasn't helping matters. Several older vehicles were showing signs of overheating from idling too long. The royal palace loomed in the background, its guards maintaining their professional composure despite the unusual commotion. In the surrounding streets, David had worked in this area long enough to develop a professional relationship with the palace security team. They often coordinated on matters involving traffic flow and crowd control, especially during state visits or public ceremonies. Today's situation, while challenging, was well within their collective ability to manage. Marcus Williams caught David's attention as the guard captain conducted his routine perimeter patrol. The two men exchanged a brief nod of acknowledgement, a small gesture that represented years of mutual respect and cooperation. David appreciated the way the palace guards conducted themselves, always professional but never aloof from the community. They served alongside other public safety officials. The traffic light system had failed at the worst possible time. Right as the diverted highway traffic reached peak volume in the Palace district, David's radio crackled with updates from the traffic management center, but the news wasn't encouraging. Repair crews were working on the signal system, but it could take another hour before normal operations resumed. Until then, manual traffic. Direction would be necessary to prevent a complete gridlock. James Mitchell's blue sedan was among the vehicles in David's line of sight. The construction worker appeared increasingly agitated, checking his phone repeatedly and occasionally hitting his steering wheel in frustration. David had seen this pattern countless times before. Good people pushed to their limits by circumstances beyond their control. His job was to keep everyone moving as safely and efficiently as possible while preventing tempers from boiling over. A delivery truck had been honking its horn persistently, adding to the tension in the air. David made a mental note to have a word with that driver once the traffic situation improved. Excessive noise only made difficult situations worse, and he had the authority to issue citations for unnecessary horn use in congested areas. For now, though, his priority was maintaining traffic flow rather than enforcement actions. The palace security radio chattered with routine communications. But David noticed an increase in activity as the guards adapted to the unusual traffic patterns around their perimeter. Any disruption to normal operations required heightened awareness, and the professional response of the royal guards impressed him once again. They understood that their role extended beyond the palace walls to include the surrounding community. A group of tourists had gathered on the sidewalk, apparently fascinated by the sight of a police officer directing traffic near the famous palace. Some were taking photographs, treating the traffic jam as an unexpected part of their sightseeing experience. David tried to maintain his professional demeanor, while being aware that his actions were being documented and possibly shared on social media platforms around the world. The radio brought an update from the highway accident scene that had started this chain of events. Emergency crews had finally cleared the wreckage, but it would take time for normal traffic patterns to resume, as backed-up vehicles worked their way through the system. David relayed this information to the Traffic Management Center and adjusted his traffic direction strategy accordingly. Marcus Williams appeared again during his patrol, this time stopping briefly to check on the situation at the intersection. The guard captain's concern for community welfare extended beyond his official duties, and David appreciated the gesture of solidarity. They had both seen how quickly traffic situations could escalate into public safety issues if not managed properly. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows, which meant the evening rush hour would soon compound the existing problems. David called for additional officers to help manage the traffic flow at key intersections throughout the district. The palace area was always sensitive from a security standpoint. Maintaining smooth traffic flow helped ensure that emergency vehicles could respond quickly if needed. A woman in a business suit had gotten out of her car to ask David about alternate routes, but unfortunately, all the major roads in the area were experiencing similar problems. He directed her to a traffic information app on her phone and suggested she contact anyone expecting her to explain the delay. Her understanding response and patience impressed him, as many people in her situation became angry or demanding. Construction worker in the blue sedan appeared to be making a phone call, probably explaining his situation to someone. David could see the man's body language relax slightly during the conversation, which was a good sign. Sometimes the simple act of communicating with others about a frustrating situation helped people cope with circumstances beyond their control. Radio communications indicated that repair crews were making progress on the traffic signal system, but complete restoration would still take some time. David adjusted his positioning slightly to optimize traffic flow while waiting for the electronic systems to come back online. His experience had taught him that small improvements in positioning could make significant differences in overall traffic movement. The Royal Guards continued their professional duties despite the unusual activity in the surrounding area. David admired their ability to maintain focus on their primary responsibilities while remaining aware of the broader situation. This kind of professional compartmentalization was essential in public safety work, where officers needed to handle immediate duties while staying alert to developing situations. As the minutes passed, David could see some improvement in the traffic flow as his manual direction began to have cumulative effects. Each small movement forward helped reduce the pressure on the entire system, and drivers were beginning to show signs of hope rather than frustration. The key to managing these situations was patience, persistence, and the understanding that progress often came in small increments rather than dramatic breakthroughs. The moment that would change everything happened in the space of a single heartbeat. Marcus Williams had just completed his inspection of the eastern perimeter and was walking back toward his assigned post when he noticed a commotion developing. In the intersection where Officer Chen was directing traffic, the careful choreography of manual traffic control was beginning to break down as frustrated drivers started making impulsive decisions. James Mitchell had finally reached the front of his lane after more than an hour of waiting. The relief of forward movement had given him hope, but that hope quickly turned to anxiety as he realized he was now in the intersection with several other vehicles, all trying to navigate the complex hand signals from the police officer. The situation required patience and careful attention, but James's stress level was making it difficult to think clearly. Officer Chen raised his hand to stop the eastbound traffic while allowing the northbound vehicles to proceed. The signal was clear and unambiguous, but James was looking at his phone at that crucial moment, reading an urgent text message from his supervisor about another delayed project. When he looked up, he saw what appeared to be an opening in the traffic pattern and pressed the accelerator. Marcus was approximately 30 feet from the intersection when he saw the blue sedan begin to move at the wrong moment. His trained eye immediately recognized that the vehicle was entering the intersection against the officer's signal, putting it on a collision course with the cross traffic that had been given the right of way. Without thinking, Marcus began running toward the intersection, his ceremonial sword bouncing at his side. The physics of the situation were unforgiving. James's car had gained momentum as it entered the intersection, while a delivery van approaching from the north had the right of way and was maintaining its speed. Trusting that the police officer's signals would be followed by all drivers, van driver saw the sedan too late to stop, and his attempt to swerve only changed the angle of the inevitable impact. Marcus reached the edge of the intersection just as the collision occurred. The metallic crash echoed off the palace walls, followed by the sounds of breaking glass and the hiss of escaping steam from damaged radiators. Time seemed to slow as Marcus assessed the scene, his emergency response training kicking in automatically despite the shock of witnessing such a violent event. Officer Chen was already on his radio, calling for emergency services while rushing toward the wreckage. His traffic direction duties were instantly forgotten as he shifted into accident response mode. The intersection, which had been a carefully managed flow of vehicles just moments before, was now a crime scene requiring immediate attention and investigation. James sat dazed in the driver's seat of his crumpled sedan, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. The airbag had deployed, probably saving his life, but the impact had left him disoriented and struggling to understand what had happened. His phone lay somewhere on the floor of the car, screen cracked from the impact. The urgent work messages now completely irrelevant. The delivery van had sustained significant damage to its front end, but the driver appeared to be conscious and alert. He was already out of his vehicle, checking on his own condition, and then looking toward the sedan with concern. The cargo in the back of his van had shifted during the impact, creating additional hazards that would need to be addressed by emergency responders. Marcus approached the sedan carefully, his guard training having prepared him for emergency situations. Despite the ceremonial nature of his usual duties, all royal guards received extensive first aid training, and many had experience with crisis management from their military backgrounds. He spoke calmly to James through the driver's side window, assessing his condition while waiting for paramedics to arrive. The crowd of tourists who had been watching the traffic situation from the sidewalk now found themselves witnesses to a serious accident. Some were already taking photographs and videos with their phones, while others called their own emergency numbers or simply stood in shock. The festive atmosphere of sightseeing had been instantly replaced by the gravity of a real emergency. Other palace guards began arriving at the scene, having heard the crash from their posts around the perimeter. They worked together to establish a secure perimeter around the accident site, ensuring that emergency vehicles would have clear access when they arrived. Their training emphasized the importance of maintaining security even during crisis situations, and they balanced their desire to help with their professional responsibilities. Officer Chen coordinated with the palace guards to control the crowd, and direct traffic around the accident scene. The intersection that had been the center of traffic management efforts now needed to be completely closed to allow for emergency response and accident investigation. The irony that their traffic problems had now become infinitely worse was not lost on anyone involved. Emergency sirens could be heard approaching from multiple directions as fire trucks, ambulances, and additional police units responded to the call. The sound echoed off the palace walls and through the surrounding streets, alerting the entire district that something serious had occurred. For many residents and workers in the area, it was the most dramatic event they had witnessed in years. Marcus remained with James, monitoring his condition and providing reassurance while they waited for medical personnel. The construction worker was beginning to show signs of shock, asking repeatedly about what had happened and whether anyone else was hurt. Marcus answered his questions calmly while conducting visual assessments for signs of serious injury that might not be immediately obvious. The delivery van driver was speaking with Officer Chen, providing his account of the accident while both men waited for the investigation team to arrive. Traffic accidents involving injuries required thorough documentation and analysis, especially when they occurred in such a high-profile location. The driver was clearly shaken but appeared to understand that he would need to remain at the scene. For some time, fire department personnel arrived first, their training emphasizing rapid response to accidents involving potential medical emergencies. They began assessing both drivers for injuries while also checking for hazards such as fuel leaks or unstable vehicle positions. The professional efficiency of their response impressed the gathered crowd and demonstrated why emergency services were so highly regarded. The Palace District, which had been struggling with traffic congestion just minutes before, was now the scene of a full-scale emergency response. Multiple agencies were coordinating their efforts while curious onlookers created additional challenges for crowd control. The transformation from routine traffic management to crisis response had happened with shocking suddenness, reminding everyone present how quickly life could change. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency as they extracted James from his damaged vehicle. Marcus stepped back to give them room while maintaining his protective watch over the scene. The construction worker was conscious but clearly suffering from shock and possible concussion symptoms. His repeated questions about what had happened and his confusion about where he was concerned, the medical team, who decided immediate hospital transport was necessary. Officer Chen was coordinating the accident investigation while managing the crowd of onlookers who had gathered around the perimeter. The intersection had become a complex scene with multiple emergency vehicles, damaged cars, debris scattered across the roadway, and dozens of witnesses who needed to be interviewed. The simple traffic jam that had started the chain of events now seemed like a minor inconvenience compared to the current situation. Marcus watched as the paramedics loaded James onto a stretcher and prepared him for transport to the hospital. The construction worker's eyes met his briefly, and Marcus saw fear and confusion mixed with gratitude. In that moment, Marcus made a decision that would define how he remembered this day. He approached the lead paramedic and quietly asked which hospital they were taking the patient to. Wanting to follow up on his condition later, the delivery van driver was giving his statement to a police investigator, his hand still shaking slightly as he recounted the moments leading up to the collision. He had been following Officer Chen's traffic signals exactly, trusting that other drivers would do the same. The sudden appearance of the sedan in his path had given him no time to react. Despite his years of commercial driving experience and generally excellent safety record, fire department personnel were working to clear debris from the intersection while checking for any hazardous materials that might have been released in the crash. Broken glass, twisted metal, and automotive fluids created safety concerns that needed to be addressed before normal traffic flow could resume. Their methodical approach to scene cleanup demonstrated the importance of thorough safety protocols and accident response. The crowd of tourists and local residents continued to grow as news of the accident spread through social media and word of mouth. Many were taking photographs and videos, some out of curiosity, and others believing they were documenting an important news event. Palace security worked with police to maintain appropriate boundaries, while ensuring that emergency personnel could work without interference. Sarah Williams received the phone call at home just as she was beginning preparations for their anniversary dinner. Marcus's voice was steady, but she could hear the underlying tension as he explained that he would be late due to an accident near the palace. He assured her that he was unharmed but needed to complete his duties related to the emergency response. Sarah's immediate concern shifted from dinner plans to her husband's well-being. The accident investigation team began taking measurements and photographs to document the scene for their official report. Officer Chen provided his first-hand account of the traffic direction efforts and the moments leading up to the collision. His professional observations would be crucial in determining the exact sequence of events and any contributing factors that might have played a role. Marcus remained at the scene even though his shift was technically ending, feeling a sense of responsibility to see the situation through to its conclusion. His fellow guards offered to cover his duties, understanding that witnessing such a traumatic event created emotional obligations that extended beyond official requirements. The brotherhood among the royal guards meant supporting each other through difficult situations. Emergency room. Personnel at Metropolitan Hospital were preparing to receive the accident victim as the ambulance made its way through traffic that was now even more congested due to the intersection closure. James's wife Lisa had been contacted and was rushing to meet him at the hospital, her mind racing with worry and questions about how seriously he had been injured. The tow trucks arrived to remove the damaged vehicles, but their work would have to wait until the investigation team finished documenting the scene. Both cars were severely damaged, with the sedan bearing the worst of the impact damage. The sight of the crumpled metal and shattered glass served as a stark reminder of how quickly a routine day could turn into a life-threatening emergency. Officer Chen was dealing with the traffic management nightmare that had resulted from closing the intersection. Alternative routes were already congested. The addition of diverted traffic from this accident was creating problems throughout the district. Additional officers were being called in to help manage the flow and prevent secondary accidents from occurring. Palace officials were monitoring the situation to ensure that security protocols remained intact despite the emergency response activities. Any disruption near the royal grounds required careful assessment and appropriate adjustments to protective measures. The accident had not threatened palace security directly, but the increased activity and media attention required vigilant oversight. Local news crews began arriving at the scene, drawn by reports of an accident in the prestigious Palace district. Their presence added another layer of complexity to the crowd control efforts. As reporters sought interviews with witnesses and officials, while camera operators positioned themselves for the best angles of the accident scene, Marcus found himself thinking about the fragility of life and how quickly circumstances could change. Just hours earlier, he had been contemplating his upcoming retirement and looking forward to a quiet anniversary dinner with his family. Now, he was part of an emergency response that would likely stay with him for the rest of his career and beyond. The cleanup efforts continued as emergency personnel worked to restore normal operations to the intersection. Street sweepers removed glass and debris, while maintenance crews checked for damage to traffic control equipment and road surfaces. The methodical process of returning to normalcy would take several hours, but progress was being made steadily. James's condition at the hospital was being evaluated by doctors who found him to be remarkably fortunate despite the severity of the crash. His injuries appeared to be limited to a concussion and various bruises and cuts, though they would keep him overnight for observation. Lisa arrived at the emergency room just as the medical team was completing their initial assessment. The investigation into the cause of the accident would continue for several days as officials analyzed witness statements, physical evidence, and any available video footage. Officer Chen's detailed account of the traffic direction efforts would be particularly important in understanding how the collision had occurred despite his attempts to maintain safe traffic flow. As evening approached, Marcus finally prepared to leave the scene and head home to Sarah. The anniversary dinner would be delayed, but not forgotten, and he looked forward to sharing the day's events with his wife. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations came after experiencing something that reminded you of what truly mattered in life. 3 weeks after the accident, the intersection near the palace had returned to its normal rhythm of daily traffic, but the impact of that traumatic afternoon continued to ripple through the lives of everyone involved. Marcus Williams found himself changed in ways he was still trying to understand. The experience of witnessing such sudden violence and human vulnerability had shifted his perspective on his role as a royal guard and his place in the community he served. James Mitchell was recovering at home, his physical injuries healing faster than the emotional trauma of the accident. The concussion had resolved and most of his cuts and bruises were fading. But he found himself reluctant to drive, especially through the area where the collision had occurred. Lisa had taken leave from her job to care for him during the first week, and their relationship had deepened through sharing the experience of his recovery. The accident investigation had concluded that James was primarily at fault for entering the intersection against Officer Chen's traffic signals, but contributing factors included the unusual traffic conditions caused by the highway accident and the malfunctioning traffic lights. The report acknowledged that the series of events leading to the collision represented a perfect storm of circumstances that had overwhelmed normal safety protocols. Marcus had visited James in the hospital twice during his recovery, an action that went far beyond his official duties but felt necessary for his own peace of mind. The two men had formed an unlikely connection through their shared experience of that traumatic afternoon. James expressed his gratitude for Marcus's immediate response and continued concern, while Marcus found in James a reminder of the human cost of the events he witnessed in his professional capacity. Officer Chen had been commended for his traffic management efforts and professional response to the accident. But he carried his own burden of wondering whether he could have done something differently to prevent the collision. His supervisors assured him that his actions had been appropriate and professional, but the second-guessing that followed traumatic events was a common response that required time and support to resolve. The Palace District had upgraded its traffic management systems following the accident, installing backup power supplies for traffic signals and improving communication protocols between traffic control officers and palace security. The changes were implemented quietly, but represented a commitment to preventing similar incidents in the future while maintaining the area's security requirements. Sarah Williams had noticed changes in her husband's behavior since the accident. Marcus was more reflective, more likely to linger over conversations about their future plans, and more expressive about his appreciation for their life together. The anniversary dinner that had been postponed due to the accident was eventually celebrated with greater meaning than either of them had expected. James's construction company had been supportive during his recovery, covering his medical expenses and holding his position open until he felt ready to return to work. However, James found himself questioning whether he wanted to continue in a high-pressure job that had contributed to his distracted state. On the day of the accident, he and Lisa began discussing alternative career paths that might offer better work-life balance. The delivery van driver had returned to work after a few days off to deal with the insurance paperwork and vehicle replacement. His company's safety record remained excellent, and the accident was officially classified as unavoidable from his perspective. Nevertheless, he found himself being extra cautious when driving through intersections, particularly those with manual traffic direction. Marcus's fellow guards had rallied around him in the weeks following the accident, understanding that witnessing traumatic events could affect even the most experienced officers. The Palace Guard's support network was strong, built on years of shared service and mutual respect. Their informal debriefing sessions helped Marcus process his emotional response to the events he had witnessed. The tourists who had witnessed the accident became part of a broader conversation about emergency response and public safety in high-profile locations. Some of their cell phone videos had been requested by investigators and insurance companies, turning casual vacation footage into important evidence. The experience reminded many of them that dramatic events could occur anywhere, even during routine sightseeing activities. Local news coverage of the accident had focused on the traffic safety issues in the Palace District, leading to public discussions about infrastructure improvements and emergency preparedness. The story resonated with residents who had experienced similar traffic frustrations, though few had seen such dramatic consequences. Community meetings were organized to discuss transportation planning and safety measures. Marcus began thinking more seriously about his approaching retirement, but with a different perspective than he had held before the accident. Rather than simply ending one phase of life and beginning another, he now saw retirement as an opportunity to contribute to his community in new ways. Perhaps through volunteer emergency response or community safety education, James and Lisa decided to use his recovery period to reassess their priorities and make changes they had been contemplating for years. They began planning a move to a smaller town where James could work with a local construction company at a more manageable pace. The accident had served as a wake-up call about the dangers of living under constant pressure and stress. The intersection where the accident occurred became a daily reminder for Marcus as he continued his patrol duties. Each time he passed the spot, he remembered not just the crash itself, but the moments that followed when strangers had come together to help each other. The memory reinforced his belief in the importance of community, service, and looking out for one another. Officer Chen implemented new procedures for manual traffic direction based on lessons learned from the accident, began positioning additional warning signs during traffic control operations, and established clearer communication protocols with drivers. His experience became part of the training curriculum for other officers, helping to prevent similar incidents in the future. The Palace security team conducted a thorough review of their emergency response procedures, identifying areas for improvement. While acknowledging that their coordination with local authorities had been effective, the relationship between Palace guards and city emergency services was strengthened. Through joint training exercises and improved communication systems. 6 months after the accident, Marcus received an invitation to James and Lisa's farewell party before their move to the countryside. The gesture touched him deeply, representing not just personal friendship, but the kind of human connection that gave meaning to his years of public service. He attended the party in civilian clothes, enjoying the opportunity to socialize as a private citizen rather than a ceremonial figure. James spoke briefly at the party about how the accident had changed his perspective on life, work, and relationships. He thanked Marcus publicly for his immediate response and continued friendship, acknowledging that the guard's presence during those frightening moments had provided comfort and reassurance when he needed it most. The speech moved many guests to tears, including Marcus himself. The traffic improvements implemented after the accident proved effective. In managing the daily flow of vehicles through the Palace district, new signal systems with redundant power supplies and improved coordination between traffic control officers reduced the likelihood of similar cascading failures. The changes were subtle, but significant for anyone who navigated those streets regularly. Marcus found that his experience with the accident enhanced his ability to connect with visitors to the palace. When tourists asked questions about his duties or the significance of the guard's presence, he spoke with greater appreciation for the human element of public service. His answers reflected not just professional knowledge, but personal understanding of community responsibility. As his retirement date approached, Marcus began documenting his experiences and insights from his decades of service. The accident had crystallized many thoughts about duty, service, and human connection that he wanted to preserve and share with future guards. His informal memoir became a valuable resource for training new personnel and understanding the deeper meaning of their role. James and Lisa's new life in a smaller town exceeded their expectations for happiness and fulfillment. James found work with a family-owned construction company that valued craftsmanship over speed, allowing him to take pride in his work without the constant pressure that had characterized his previous job. The pace of life gave them time to appreciate each other and their surroundings. The memory of the accident remained with all who witnessed it, but it had evolved from a source of trauma into a reminder of human resilience and the importance of community support. Each person involved had been changed by the experience generally, for the better as they learned to appreciate the fragility of life and the strength that comes from helping others during difficult times. Marcus's final year of service was marked by a deeper sense of purpose and connection to the community he protected. The accident had taught him that being a royal guard meant more than ceremonial duties or security protocols. It meant being ready to serve others in whatever capacity circumstances demanded. When he finally retired, he did so with the knowledge that his service had made a real difference in people's lives, not just through grand gestures, but through simple acts of human compassion and professional dedication.